The lecture hall buzzed with quiet conversation as students from across the galaxy settled into their seats. Crystalline beings that sparkled like living diamonds sat next to towering creatures with too many arms, while small, furry aliens chatted with others whose skin shifted colors as they spoke. It was another ordinary day at the Galactic Educational Station, where the brightest minds from dozens of worlds came to learn about the universe they all shared. Professor Caney walked to the front of the room, his long silver hair catching the artificial light. The Alterian was known throughout the station for his fascinating lectures on xenobiology, the study of life from different worlds. Today's topic was written on the holographic board behind him in glowing letters. Predatory behaviors across known worlds. "Good morning, class," Professor Caney said, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "Today we will explore one of the most fundamental aspects of life throughout the galaxy, the hunt, the eternal dance between predator and prey that has shaped evolution on every world we have studied." A student near the front raised her hand. It was Vera, a Mantari whose compound eyes glittered as she spoke. "Professor, isn't it true that the most successful predators are always solitary hunters? On my homeworld, the greatest predator is the Shadowstalker. It hunts alone and has never been defeated." Professor Caney nodded approvingly. "An excellent observation, Vera. Yes, across the galaxy, we see this pattern repeated again and again. The most dangerous predators are those that rely on their individual skills. Stealth, speed, strength, intelligence. They need no help from others." He pressed a button, and the holographic display came to life, showing various alien creatures. Consider the void cats of Terminus. These magnificent beings can phase through solid matter and strike without warning. They hunt alone because they need no assistance. Or look at the deep swimmers of the ocean worlds. Each one is larger than a starship and hunts the vast sea creatures of their world in solitude. More images appeared. Massive flying creatures with razor-sharp wings. Invisible beasts that could only be seen when they chose to be. Underground hunters that could sense vibrations from miles away. Each one a perfect killing machine that worked alone. This makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, Professor Caney continued. Why share a kill when you are capable of taking it yourself? Why risk betrayal or weakness from others when your own abilities are sufficient? Individual excellence is the mark of a true apex predator. Students throughout the room nodded in agreement. It was common knowledge that pack hunting was something only weaker creatures did. Small animals that couldn't survive on their own might group together, but anything truly dangerous stood alone. In the back row, a young man with brown hair and quiet eyes listened to the discussion. Alex Reed was one of only 3 humans at the entire academy. His species was relatively new to the galactic community, having only made contact with other worlds a few decades ago. Most of his classmates barely noticed him, which was exactly how Alex preferred it. "Now then," Professor Caney said, "can anyone give me examples of pack hunting behavior that we have observed in the galaxy?" Several hands went up. A student who looked like a walking tree spoke first. "The swarm beetles of the dry world sometimes hunt in groups, but only when food is very scarce." "Good," the professor replied, "though we should note that this is desperation behavior, not their natural state." "Anyone else?" a blue-skinned student added. "Some of the hive-minded species coordinate their hunting, but they are essentially one organism spread across many bodies. That hardly counts as true cooperation." "Excellent point," Professor Caney agreed. "True, cooperation requires individual choice and decision-making. Hive minds are simply extensions of a single consciousness. What we are looking for are examples of separate, independent creatures choosing to work together." The room fell quiet as students thought. It was clear that such examples were rare. In fact, most species considered pack hunting to be a sign of weakness or primitive development. Advanced predators didn't need help. Alex raised his hand. Professor Caney looked surprised. The human student rarely spoke in class, preferring to listen and learn. "Yes, Alex? Do you have an example?" "I was wondering about cooperative hunting among apex predators," Alex said quietly. The room stirred with confusion. Vera turned to look at him with her compound eyes. "What do you mean?" Apex predators don't cooperate. That's what makes them apex predators. I mean predators that are individually capable but choose to hunt together anyway, Alex explained. Not because they have to, but because it makes them more effective. A student who resembled a large lizard laughed. That doesn't make sense. If you're already at the top of the food chain, cooperation would just slow you down. You'd have to share your kills and coordinate with others. It's inefficient. Professor Caney looked intrigued despite his skepticism. Alex, I appreciate your curiosity, but I think you may be misunderstanding something fundamental about predatory behavior. True apex predators are defined by their individual superiority. They don't need help because they are already perfect hunters. But what if working together made them even better hunters? Alex asked. The room erupted in quiet laughter and whispered comments. The idea seemed absurd to most of the students. If a creature was already the best hunter on its world, how could adding others improve its success? I'm afraid that's not how evolution works, Professor Caney said gently. Natural selection favors individual excellence in predators. The strongest, fastest, smartest survive and reproduce. Cooperation is selected against because it creates dependencies and weaknesses. What about on Earth? Alex asked. The professor paused. Earth was still a relatively unknown world to most galactic citizens. Humans were new to the community, and their planet was considered unremarkable by most standards. No unique technology, no special abilities, no particularly dangerous reputation. Well, Professor Caney said carefully, I'm sure Earth follows the same patterns we see everywhere else. Your apex predators are most likely solitary hunters, just like on every other world. Alex was quiet for a moment, then said, Actually, Professor, on Earth our most successful predators rarely hunt alone. The laughter in the room faded. Students looked at each other uncertainly. This statement seemed to contradict everything. They knew about how predators worked. Vera spoke up again, her voice showing annoyance. That's impossible. You must be thinking of scavengers or small prey animals. Real predators don't share. Or perhaps you're referring to pack behavior during mating season, suggested another student. Some species do gather temporarily for reproduction, but that's not the same as cooperative hunting. Alex shook his head. I mean regular hunting. Day-to-day survival. Our most dangerous predators work together as a team. Professor Caney frowned. This was highly unusual. In all his years of studying xenobiology, he had never encountered a world where apex predators regularly cooperated. It went against every principle he understood about how evolution shaped hunting behavior. Alex, he said slowly, I think there may be some confusion here. Perhaps what you're describing are opportunistic feeders or social species that occasionally share resources. But true predatory cooperation among apex hunters? That would be unprecedented. Could I show the class some examples? Alex asked politely. The professor hesitated. He didn't want to embarrass the young human, but he also couldn't let misconceptions spread in his classroom. At the same time, his scientific curiosity was aroused. What if Earth really was different somehow? Very well, Professor Caney said, finally. Please access the holographic display system. Show us these cooperative apex predators of yours. Alex stood and walked to the front of the room. As he reached for the display controls, the lecture hall grew quiet. Students who had been whispering fell silent. Even those who had been taking notes stopped writing. Something in Alex's calm confidence suggested that what they were about to see would be unlike anything they had encountered before. The human moved with quiet certainty, as if he was about to reveal something that would change how they thought about predators forever. Thank you, Professor, Alex said as the holographic system activated. I think this will be very educational for everyone. The room held its breath as Alex prepared his presentation. None of them could imagine what Earth's predators might look like, or how they could possibly challenge everything the galaxy knew about hunting behavior. But they were about to find out. The holographic display hummed to life as Alex adjusted the controls with practiced ease. Around him, the diverse collection of alien students shifted in their seats with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, in languages that created strange musical sounds or clicking noises. Others simply stared with their various types of eyes, waiting to see what the quiet human would show them. Alex turned to face the class, his expression calm but determined. Before I begin, I want to ask everyone a question. What do you think makes a perfect predator? Hands shot up around the room. Professor Caney gestured to a student whose skin looked like living metal. Speed and stealth, the student said confidently. The ability to strike before the prey knows death is coming. Strength, added Vera, her compound eyes reflecting the room's lights. On my world, the greatest hunters can crush bone with a single bite. They need nothing else. A floating creature that seemed to be made of purple gas spoke in a voice like wind through caves. Intelligence above all. The smartest predator can outthink any prey, no matter how fast or strong. Alex nodded as more students shared their ideas. Size, venom, camouflage, razor-sharp claws, the ability to fly, electromagnetic, senses. Each species seemed to believe that individual superiority in one or more areas was the key to being a perfect hunter. Those are all excellent traits, Alex agreed. Earth's predators have many of them too. But what you're describing are tools. What I want to show you is how Earth's most successful hunters use a different kind of tool entirely. He activated the holographic display, and suddenly the room was filled with a winter forest. Snow covered the ground and bare trees reached toward a gray sky. The students found themselves looking at a landscape unlike anything most of them had ever seen. This is northern Canada on Earth, Alex explained. One of the coldest places on our planet. The prey animals here are large and well adapted to survive in harsh conditions. Moose, caribou, elk. Some weigh as much as small vehicles and have antlers that can kill with a single strike. Moving through the forest came a pack of wolves. The aliens watched with interest as the gray and black animals moved silently through the snow. They were clearly predators, but individually they didn't look particularly impressive compared to the massive prey animals Alex had described. Wolves, Alex said simply. Each one weighs maybe 30 or 40 kilograms. Their prey often weighs 10 times more than they do. By themselves, a single wolf would have almost no chance against a healthy adult moose. Vera made a dismissive sound. Then they are not apex predators. They are simply scavengers picking off the weak and sick. Watch, Alex said quietly. The hologram followed the wolf pack as they moved through the forest with purpose. But this wasn't random wandering. The wolves were clearly tracking something, and their movements were coordinated in ways that surprised the watching students. Notice how they spread out. Alex pointed to different wolves in the pack. They're not all following the same path. Each wolf has a specific position and role. The aliens watched more closely now. Indeed, the wolves weren't simply running together. Some moved ahead while others hung back. Some took positions to the left, while others went right. It looked almost like a military formation. They're herding the prey, realized a student whose species resembled giant butterflies, driving it toward a specific location. Exactly, Alex confirmed. But watch what happens next. The wolves had found their target, a large male caribou with impressive antlers. Under normal circumstances, such an animal would be nearly invulnerable to creatures the wolves' size. But the pack didn't attack directly. Instead, they began a carefully coordinated harassment campaign. Wolves appeared from multiple directions, never committing to a full attack, but constantly pressuring the caribou to move. When it turned to face one threat, wolves appeared from other angles. When it tried to run, wolves were already in position to cut off escape routes. They're exhausting it, Professor Caney observed, his scientific mind analyzing the display. But this is still just persistence hunting. Many species use stamina to wear down prey. Keep watching, Alex said. What happened next surprised even Professor Caney. As the caribou grew tired, the wolves didn't simply swarm it. Instead, they executed what could only be described as a tactical maneuver. Several wolves drove the prey toward a specific location where other pack members waited in ambush. When the caribou arrived, it found itself surrounded with no escape route. But even then, the wolves didn't attack randomly. The largest, strongest wolves went for the most dangerous areas, engaging the caribou's antlers and preventing it from using its primary weapons. Meanwhile, smaller wolves attacked from safer positions, working to bring the prey down without risking injury to themselves. Each wolf has a job, Alex explained, as the students watched in fascination. The scouts who found the prey, the drivers who herded it, the blockers who prevented escape, the fighters who engaged it directly, and the finishers who delivered the killing blow once it was safe to do so. The room had grown quiet. This wasn't the simple pack behavior the aliens had expected. This was strategy, coordination, and role specialization at a level that made many of them uncomfortable. A student who looked like a living crystal formation spoke up, her voice ringing like distant bells. But surely this is unusual. Most of your world's predators must hunt alone like everywhere else. Alex smiled and changed the holographic display. Now they were looking at an African savanna under a blazing sun. Golden grassland stretched to the horizon, broken by scattered acacia trees. "Let me introduce you to lions," Alex said. A pride of lions lounged in the shade of a tree. The aliens studied them with professional interest. Here were predators that looked more familiar. Large, powerful, with obvious weapons in the form of claws and fangs. Surely these hunted like proper apex predators should. "The males look formidable," commented a student whose species had evolved from pack ice hunters. "Those are clearly solitary hunters." "Actually," Alex said, "the males rarely hunt at all. Watch the females." The display shifted to show lionesses moving across the savanna. Like the wolves, they weren't moving randomly. They were spreading out in a specific pattern, approaching a herd of zebras from multiple angles. "Once again, we see coordination," Alex pointed out. "But lions take it even further than wolves." The students watched as the lionesses executed an ambush that was breathtaking in its complexity. Some lions remained hidden in tall grass, perfectly positioned downwind where the zebras couldn't smell them. Others made themselves visible at the herd's edge but didn't attack. Instead, they waited. "Why aren't they attacking?" asked Vera, clearly frustrated by what she was seeing. "Because they're not the attackers," Alex explained. "They're the drivers. Watch what happens when the zebras run." When the zebras finally spooked and began to run, they fled directly away from the visible lions, straight toward where the hidden lionesses waited in ambush. It was a trap that had been set up with perfect precision, taking advantage of the prey's natural instincts to drive them exactly where the predators wanted them to go. "This is impossible," muttered a student whose species had never developed cooperative behavior. "How do they coordinate so precisely? Do they have some kind of telepathic connection?" "No telepathy," Alex said. "Just communication, experience, and practice. The lionesses learn these techniques from their mothers and aunts. They practice together. They know each other well enough to predict how their pride mates will move." Professor Caney was studying the display with the intensity of a scholar who had just discovered something that challenged his fundamental understanding of the universe. "Alex, what you're showing us is unprecedented. I've studied predatory behavior from hundreds of worlds, and I've never seen anything like this level of tactical cooperation among apex hunters. But it gets more interesting," Alex said, his voice carrying a note that made several students shift nervously in their seats. He changed the display again. This time they were looking at an ocean, but not the familiar blue oceans of most worlds. This ocean was gray-green and choppy, with waves that spoke of deep, powerful currents. "Earth's oceans cover most of our planet," Alex explained, "and they're home to some of our most sophisticated hunters." A pod of dolphins appeared on the display, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with effortless grace. The aliens watched with interest but also confusion. These creatures looked intelligent but hardly threatening. "Dolphins," Alex said, "each one about as long as a human is tall. They hunt fish, which you might think would be simple prey." "Surely, fish are easy prey for any aquatic predator," suggested a student whose species had evolved in underground rivers. "Not when the fish are smart enough to form defensive schools," Alex replied. The display showed massive schools of fish moving through the water like living clouds, thousands of individuals moving as one to confuse and evade predators. It was an impressive defense that had clearly evolved over millions of years. So how do dolphins deal with this? Alex asked rhetorically. What the students saw next left many of them speechless. The dolphins began to coordinate their movements in ways that made the wolf pack look simple by comparison. Some dolphins dove deep while others remained near the surface. They began to swim in specific patterns around the fish school, and slowly, incredibly, the massive school began to compress. They're creating a net. Professor Caney breathed, his scientific training allowing him to see what was happening even as his preconceptions struggled to accept it. A net made of mud and bubbles, Alex confirmed. The dolphins work together to create a wall of sediment and air bubbles that the fish can't see through and won't swim through. Then they take turns feeding while the others maintain the trap. The room was completely quiet now. Even the species that communicated through color changes or electromagnetic fields had fallen silent. What they were seeing challenged everything they thought they knew about how predators worked. This requires planning, Professor Caney said, slowly. Abstract thinking. The ability to understand not just your own role but the roles of others. The capacity to delay gratification while your teammates feed first. And trust, added Alex. Each dolphin has to trust that the others will maintain their part of the trap. They have to believe that when it's their turn to feed, their teammates won't abandon them. A student near the front of the room, one of the peaceful herbivorous species, spoke up in a voice that trembled slightly. Alex, on how many of your world's predators exhibit this kind of behavior? Alex looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students from dozens of different worlds, each representing millions of years of evolution that had taught them that the most dangerous predators were those that stood alone. Most of them, he said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The word most hung in the air like a challenge that none of the alien students knew how to answer. Around the lecture hall, beings from dozens of worlds exchanged uncertain glances. Some of their skin colors shifted to darker hues, others made quiet, nervous sounds in their native languages, and a few simply stared at Alex with expressions that mixed fascination with something approaching fear. Professor Caney was the first to break the silence, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undertone of scientific excitement mixed with unease. Alex, when you say most, surely you're including small pack animals and opportunistic feeders. The dolphins you showed us are impressive, but they're hardly apex predators in the traditional sense. Actually, Professor, Alex replied, his tone remaining respectfully calm. Dolphins are apex predators. They have no natural enemies in Earth's oceans except other dolphins and one other species. But let me show you something that might be even more interesting. The holographic display shifted again, and suddenly the classroom was filled with the sight of a massive ocean under a stormy sky. The water was dark and deep, and waves crashed with tremendous force that made several aquatic students lean forward with interest. This is the North Pacific Ocean, Alex explained, home to some of the most intelligent hunters on our planet. A shape moved beneath the waves. At first it was just a shadow, but as it rose toward the surface, the students could see that it was enormous. Black and white coloration marked a creature that was longer than most of their shuttlecraft. Orcas, Alex said simply, also called killer whales, though they're actually the largest members of the dolphin family. An adult can be 8 meters long and weigh 6 tons. Vera's compound eyes reflected the holographic display as she studied the massive creature. Now, this looks like a proper apex predator, surely something this large and powerful hunts alone. Watch, Alex said, and activated the next part of his presentation. More orcas appeared in the display. Not just one or two, but an entire pod of the massive hunters. The students watched as the pod moved through the ocean with purpose and coordination that made their previous examples seem simple by comparison. Orcas hunt in family groups called pods, Alex explained. But unlike the wolves and lions I showed you, orcas don't just cooperate. They have culture. Culture? Professor Caney leaned forward, his scientific training telling him this was impossible, while his eyes showed him evidence to the contrary. Each pod has its own hunting techniques that are passed down from mothers to their children, Alex continued. What you're about to see is unique to this particular pod. Other orcas hunt differently. The display showed the pod approaching a beach where seals were resting on the sand. The aliens watched with interest, expecting to see the orcas attack the seals in the water. Instead, something unprecedented happened. One of the orcas swam directly at the beach at tremendous speed. Just before reaching the shore, it rode a wave up onto the sand itself, sliding across the beach to grab a seal before wriggling back into the water. The students gasped. Several made sounds of disbelief in their native languages. A creature that, large intentionally beaching itself, was incredibly dangerous. If it got stuck, it would die. "That's impossible," breathed a student whose species had evolved from ocean predators. "The risk is too great. No predator would attempt something so dangerous. Unless it had been taught how to do it safely by its family," Alex said. "And unless it knew its pod would help if something went wrong." The display continued, showing young orcas practicing this technique under the careful supervision of adults. They learned how to judge waves, how to slide efficiently across sand, and most importantly, how to get back to deep water safely. "They teach their young," Professor Caney said, his voice filled with wonder. "Actual instruction, not just instinctive behavior." "Different pods have different techniques," Alex confirmed. "Some specialize in hunting great white sharks. Others focus on different whale species. Some have learned to work with human fishing vessels, understanding our technology and using it to their advantage." A crystalline student whose species communicated through light patterns flashed a series of colors that translated roughly to profound confusion. But why develop such specialized techniques? Why not simply use brute force? They're clearly powerful enough. "Because cooperation makes them more effective than force alone ever could," Alex replied. He changed the display to show orcas hunting a blue whale, the largest animal that had ever lived on Earth. A blue whale can be 30 meters long and weigh over 150 tons, Alex explained. Even an orca pod couldn't kill an adult through direct attack. So they developed a different strategy. The students watched in amazement as the orcas worked together to separate a young blue whale from its mother. Some orcas prevented the mother from helping, while others wore down the calf, taking turns to keep it from surfacing to breathe. It was a complex, coordinated effort that required precise timing and complete trust between pod members. "This hunt can take hours," Alex noted. "Each orca has to play its role perfectly, or the entire effort fails. And they do this without any form of communication we can detect, relying entirely on their knowledge of each other and their shared hunting culture." The room had grown so quiet that the soft hum of the station's life support system seemed loud. Students who had been taking notes had stopped writing. Even Professor Caney seemed to have forgotten about his lesson plan, completely absorbed in what Alex was showing them. "But surely," said a student whose species resembled living plants, "this is as complex as Earth's predatory cooperation gets? These examples are already far beyond anything else in the known galaxy." Alex paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Actually, I haven't shown you Earth's most sophisticated cooperative hunters yet." "More sophisticated than orcas?" Professor Caney asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Much more," Alex confirmed, changing the display once more. Now they were looking at a desert landscape under a blazing sun. Red rock formations jutted up from sandy ground, and the heat shimmer made the air dance with mirages. It looked like a harsh, unforgiving place where only the toughest creatures could survive. "The Sonoran Desert in North America," Alex explained. "One of Earth's most challenging environments. Prey is scarce, temperatures are extreme, and competition is fierce." A bird appeared on the display. It was brown and unremarkable looking, perhaps the size of a small hawk. The student studied it with puzzlement. After seeing wolves, lions, and orcas, this creature seemed almost ordinary. "Harris hawks," Alex said. "They're about the size of your arm, and they hunt prey that includes rabbits, ground squirrels, and even small reptiles." Vera made a dismissive clicking sound with her mandibles. "Finally, a sensible predator. Individual hunters of appropriate prey. This is what we should expect from evolution." "Actually," Alex said with a slight smile, "Harris hawks are probably the most strategically sophisticated hunters I've shown you so far." The display zoomed out to show more hawks, and the students realized they were watching not just one bird, but an entire group. As they watched, the hawks began to spread out across the desert landscape in a pattern that seemed random at first, but gradually revealed itself to be highly organized. Harris hawks hunt in groups of 2 to 6 individuals, Alex explained. But unlike pack mammals, they don't rely on size or strength. They rely on intelligence and strategy. The hawks had located a rabbit hiding under a desert bush. The students expected to see a simple attack, but what happened next defied all their expectations about how birds should hunt. One hawk landed near the bush and began to make noise and movement, clearly trying to flush out the rabbit. But when the rabbit ran, it didn't flee into the open where the hawk could catch it. Instead, it ran to another bush seeking better cover, which was exactly what the hawks had wanted. A second hawk was already waiting at the new bush. When the rabbit arrived, this hawk began the same harassment behavior, forcing the rabbit to flee again. But again, the rabbit's escape route led it directly to where another hawk was waiting. "They're playing a shell game," Professor Caney breathed, his academic composure finally cracking. "They're deliberately driving the prey from one hiding spot to another, and they know exactly where it will go. Each hawk understands not just its own role, but the roles of all the others," Alex confirmed. "They can predict where the prey will flee and have hunters already in position. They take turns being the flusher and the catcher, and they can adapt their strategy in real time if the prey does something unexpected." The students watched in stunned silence as the hawks executed their hunt with precision that would have impressed military strategists. The rabbit, despite being perfectly adapted to desert survival, had no chance against hunters who could think several moves ahead and coordinate their actions seamlessly. But Alex wasn't finished. The most remarkable part is what happens after the kill. The hawk that had made the final capture did something that shocked every alien in the room. Instead of eating the rabbit itself, it called to the other hawks. When they arrived, the successful hunter stepped back and allowed the others to feed first. "The hunter who makes the kill doesn't automatically get the first or largest share," Alex explained. "They share based on contribution to the hunt and the needs of the group. Hawks that are feeding young get priority. Hawks that did the dangerous work of flushing get their share. The actual killer might eat last." A student whose species had never evolved beyond individual competition made a sound of complete bewilderment. But why? Why would the successful hunter give up its reward? This goes against every principle of survival. "Because next time, that hawk might be the flusher while another makes the kill," Alex replied. "They understand that their long-term survival depends on the success of the group, not just individual victories." Professor Caney was staring at the holographic display as if it contained the secrets of the universe. When he spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of biology had just been shattered. "Alex, what you're describing isn't just cooperation. It's abstract reasoning, strategic planning, trust, delayed gratification, and social contract theory. These are cognitive abilities that most species don't develop until they reach sapience. And yet," Alex said quietly, "these are non-sapient. Animals driven purely by instinct and learned behavior." The implications of this statement fell over the classroom like a heavy blanket. If non-sapient predators on Earth could develop such sophisticated cooperative strategies, what did that mean for intelligent species? What did it mean for humans? A student in the middle of the room, one of the peaceful species that had never developed predatory behavior, asked the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. "Alex, if these are your non-intelligent predators, what are your intelligent predators like?" Alex looked around the room at the faces of students from worlds where the most dangerous hunters had always been solitary creatures driven by individual excellence. He saw beings whose entire evolutionary history had taught them that cooperation was a sign of weakness, that true predators stood alone. "Well," he said carefully, "I suppose that depends on how you define predator." The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes when an entire room of people realizes they have been asking the wrong questions all along. The question about intelligent predators seemed to echo in the lecture hall long after the words had been spoken. Alex stood quietly at the front of the room, his hand resting on the holographic display controls, while dozens of alien students waited for an answer that they were beginning to suspect might change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Professor Caney cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Alex, when you say it depends on how we define predator, what exactly do you mean? Alex seemed to consider this carefully before responding. Professor, how would you define a predator? Well, the Alturian scholar began, falling back on textbook definitions. A predator is an organism that hunts and kills other organisms for food. It's characterized by specialized adaptations for locating, capturing, and consuming prey. That's the traditional definition, Alex agreed. But what if we expanded it slightly? What if we defined a predator as any organism that actively seeks out and acquires resources through strategic action, whether those resources are food, territory, or something else entirely? Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This broader definition seemed to include behaviors that went far beyond simple hunting. I'm not sure I follow, said a student whose crystalline body rang like wind chimes when she moved. Are you suggesting there are predators that don't hunt for food? Alex activated the holographic display again. This time, instead of showing a natural landscape, the projection displayed something that looked like a construction site. But the builders were not using machines or tools that any of the aliens recognized. These are beavers, Alex said as the display showed furry, flat-tailed creatures working in and around a river. They're herbivores. They eat plants, bark, and roots. By the traditional definition, they're not predators at all. The students watched with curiosity as the beavers moved back and forth, clearly engaged in some kind of organized activity. They were cutting down trees with their powerful teeth and dragging the logs toward the river. What are they doing? Asked Vera, her compound eyes tracking the movement of individual beavers. They're engineering their environment, Alex replied. Watch what happens next. The display showed the beavers working together to build a dam across the river. It was not random construction. Each beaver seemed to understand exactly where to place logs, mud, and stones to create a structure that would hold back the flowing water. This is remarkable construction, admitted a student whose species were master builders. But I still don't understand how this relates to predatory behavior. Because they're not just building randomly, Alex explained. They're strategically altering their environment to make resources more accessible. By damming the river, they create a pond that allows them to safely transport food and building materials. They're using cooperative engineering to hunt resources more effectively than they ever could individually. Professor Caney studied the display with growing fascination. But this is still resource acquisition, not true predatory behavior. Alex nodded and changed the display. Now they were looking at what appeared to be a war zone. The landscape was torn up, with elaborate tunnel systems and strategic fortifications visible from above. Army ants, Alex said simply. The students found themselves looking at rivers of insects moving across the landscape in highly organized formations. But these weren't the simple swarm behaviors they had seen from other worlds. These ants moved with military precision, following specific routes and maintaining complex formations. Each colony can contain millions of individuals, Alex explained. And when they hunt, they don't just look for food. They systematically strip entire areas of all available prey, using coordinated tactics that would impress any military strategist. The display zoomed in to show the ants in action. Some formed bridges with their own bodies so others could cross obstacles. Others created living ladders to scale vertical surfaces. Still others established supply lines to carry captured prey back to the colony. They're not just hunting, Professor Caney observed, his voice filled with scientific awe. They're conducting military campaigns. Exactly, Alex confirmed. They scout ahead to identify targets. They coordinate multi-pronged attacks. They establish secure supply lines. They adapt their tactics based on the resistance they encounter. And they do all of this through pure cooperation, with no individual ant making strategic decisions for the whole group. A student who resembled a giant praying mantis raised one of her 4 arms. But these are insects with simple brains. Surely more intelligent species don't need such elaborate cooperation. Alex's expression grew more serious. Actually, the more intelligent a species becomes, the more sophisticated their cooperation tends to be. He activated a new section of the holographic display, and suddenly the classroom was filled with images of Earth's oceans again. But this time, instead of showing individual predators, the display showed something that made several students gasp in recognition. Whales. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, moving through the deep ocean in formations that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Humpback whales, Alex said. Each one can be 15 meters long and weigh 40 tons. They're among the most intelligent non-sapient species on our planet. The students watched as the whales began to engage in behavior that defied everything they thought they knew about large ocean predators. The whales were diving deep, then swimming upward in a coordinated spiral pattern. "What are they doing?" asked a student whose aquatic species had never seen anything like this behavior. "They're bubble net feeding," Alex explained. "Watch carefully." As the whales spiraled upward, they began releasing streams of bubbles from their blowholes. The bubbles formed a cylindrical net around a school of small fish. The fish, unable to see through the wall of bubbles and unwilling to swim through, it became trapped in an ever-tightening cylinder. "But that's not the remarkable part," Alex continued. As the students watched, one whale began to make a specific sound, a deep, haunting call that carried through the water. Immediately, all the other whales responded by swimming upward through the center of the bubble net, with their mouths wide open, catching the trapped fish. "The whale that calls is the coordinator," Alex explained. "It watches the bubble net and determines the perfect moment for the group to attack. Without that signal, the entire strategy fails." "How do they decide who gives the signal?" asked Professor Caney. "They take turns," Alex replied. "Different whales coordinate different hunts. They seem to understand that the responsibility should be shared and that different individuals might be better coordinators under different conditions." The implications of this statement hung in the air. The whales weren't just cooperating. They were demonstrating leadership rotation, strategic patience, and collective decision-making. But Alex wasn't done. The holographic display shifted to show a very different scene. Now they were looking at a group of primates in a dense jungle, but these weren't the simple tool users that some species had evolved into. These creatures were doing something far more complex. "Chimpanzees," Alex said. "Our closest evolutionary relatives." The students watched as a group of chimpanzees moved through the forest with obvious purpose. They were hunting, but not in the random, opportunistic way that most species hunted. They were executing a coordinated campaign. "They're hunting other primates," Alex explained as the display showed the chimpanzees surrounding a group of smaller monkeys. "But watch how they do it." Some chimpanzees climbed high into the canopy to drive the prey downward. Others positioned themselves at ground level to cut off escape routes. Still others waited in ambush positions along the routes they knew the prey would take. "They're using three-dimensional tactics," Professor Caney breathed, "coordinating movement through multiple levels of the forest simultaneously. And they're using tools," Alex added. The display showed chimpanzees fashioning spears from branches, sharpening them with their teeth, and using them to hunt smaller animals hiding in tree hollows. But more impressive than the tool use was the cooperation in creating and sharing the tools. "They teach each other," Alex continued. "Young chimpanzees learn not just how to make tools, but how to coordinate their use with others. They plan their hunts in advance, sometimes days ahead of time, and they share the results based on contribution and social relationships." "This is impossible," whispered a student whose species had never developed beyond simple tool use. "You're describing military strategy, advanced tool use, social planning, and resource allocation. These should be the behaviors of sapient species." Alex looked around the room at the increasingly uncomfortable faces of his classmates. "There's one more thing I should mention about chimpanzees." "More?" Professor Caney asked weakly. "They conduct warfare." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex activated the final part of his presentation, showing chimpanzee troops engaged in organized conflict with neighboring groups. The students watched in horrified fascination as the primates used coordinated tactics, strategic deception, and long-term planning to defeat their enemies. They scout enemy territory, Alex explained. They gather intelligence about enemy strength and movements. They coordinate surprise attacks using multiple groups striking from different directions. They understand concepts like flanking maneuvers and tactical retreats. And when they win, asked a student whose voice trembled slightly, they expand their territory, eliminate competition for resources, and sometimes capture members of the defeated group to integrate into their own troops. The room was so quiet that individual breathing could be heard. Students from dozens of worlds representing millions of years of evolutionary history sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had just learned. Finally, Vera spoke, her compound eyes dim with shock. Alex, these are the behaviors of sapient species. Strategic, planning, tool creation, military tactics, territorial expansion. But you're saying these are just animals on your world? Alex nodded solemnly. Non-sapient animals, driven by instinct and learned behavior. Then what? Professor Caney asked in a voice barely above a whisper. What are your sapient species like? Alex was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made every student in the room lean forward to hear. Professor, there's only one sapient species on Earth. The implication hit the room like a physical force. If these were the capabilities of Earth's non-sapient predators, what did that mean for the one species that had developed true intelligence? What did that mean for humans? The revelation that Earth had only one sapient species settled over the classroom like a cold shadow. Students who had been leaning forward in their seats now pressed back, as if trying to create distance between themselves and the quiet human at the front of the room. The implications were staggering. If Earth's non-sapient predators could plan military campaigns and conduct warfare, what heights of cooperative hunting had its sapient species achieved? Alex seemed to understand the weight of what he had just revealed. He stood silently for a moment, his hand still resting on the holographic display controls, while dozens of alien minds struggled to process the logical conclusion of everything they had witnessed. Professor Caney was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Alex, when you say there's only one sapient species on Earth, you mean... I mean humans. Alex confirmed quietly. My species. The display activated again, but this time it showed something that looked almost peaceful at first glance. A vast grassland under an endless blue sky, with small groups of early humans moving across the landscape. They looked primitive compared to the technology-rich civilizations of the galactic community, carrying simple tools and wearing basic clothing. This is Earth about 50,000 years ago, Alex explained. Early humans before we developed agriculture or permanent settlements. Most galactic anthropologists would classify these people as barely above the animal level. Several students nodded, recognizing what appeared to be a standard pre-technological society. Many worlds had produced similar species before they developed space travel. But watch how they hunt, Alex continued. The display focused on a group of humans tracking a massive mammoth across the grassland. The creature was enormous, standing twice the height of a human and weighing several tons. Its curved tusks could easily kill any individual hunter who came too close. By any reasonable measure, this should be impossible prey for these humans, Alex noted. They have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They can't run as fast as the mammoth or overpower it through individual strength. The students watched as the human hunters spread out across the landscape in a pattern that was becoming disturbingly familiar. They had seen this before with wolves, lions, and other Earth predators, but these were sapient beings, which meant their coordination would be far more sophisticated. They're not just tracking one mammoth, Professor Caney observed, his scientific training allowing him to see the broader pattern. They're tracking the entire herd. Over multiple days, Alex confirmed. This hunt began a week ago, and it involves not just these hunters but dozens of other humans coordinating across hundreds of miles of territory. The display expanded to show the true scope of the hunt. Other groups of humans were positioned along the mammoth herd's migration route, not to attack but to subtly influence the herd's direction. Still others were preparing elaborate traps and barriers designed to channel the massive animals toward a specific location. "They're herding the entire herd toward a cliff," breathed a student whose species had evolved as persistence hunters. "But the complexity of the coordination required is beyond anything we've seen from Earth's other predators," Alex finished. "Because humans don't just cooperate instinctively. We plan, we communicate complex ideas, we adapt our strategies in real time, and we can coordinate actions across vast distances and time periods." The climax of the hunt played out on the holographic display, and it was unlike anything the alien students had ever imagined. The mammoth herd, guided by weeks of subtle manipulation, approached a cliff where hundreds of humans waited in carefully prepared positions. But instead of a simple stampede, what followed was a precisely orchestrated operation that demonstrated planning and coordination on a scale that defied belief. Some humans created noise and movement to direct the herd's approach. Others used fire to control exactly which animals would be driven over the cliff. Still others waited below to finish off the wounded mammoths and begin the complex process of preserving and distributing the meat among dozens of tribes. "This single hunt will feed thousands of people for months," Alex explained. But the remarkable thing isn't just the scale of the operation. It's that these different groups of humans had probably never met before this hunt. They coordinated based on shared cultural knowledge, common signals, and mutual trust between complete strangers. "Impossible," muttered a student whose species had never developed cooperation beyond family groups. The cognitive load required to coordinate that many individuals across such distances is exactly what made humans the dominant species on Earth, Alex replied. "We didn't just develop pack hunting like other predators. We developed civilization-level cooperation while we were still hunter-gatherers." The display changed to show human settlements from different periods of history, and the students watched in growing unease as they saw the logical progression of human cooperative hunting. Villages coordinating to hunt larger territories, cities organizing to acquire resources from distant lands, nations working together to exploit entire continents. "You took pack hunting and scaled it up," Professor Caney said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. "You applied predatory cooperation to every aspect of your society." "It gets more complex," Alex said, advancing the display to show more recent human history. Now they were looking at massive human armies moving across battlefields with precision that made the chimpanzee warfare seem simple by comparison. Thousands of individuals coordinating their actions through complex hierarchical command structures, using advanced communication systems, and executing strategies that required abstract thinking on a scale the aliens had never imagined. "Human warfare," Alex explained unnecessarily. "We took the cooperative hunting strategies you've seen and applied them to competing with other human groups." The students watched formations of human soldiers moving with the same coordinated precision they had seen in wolf packs and lion prides, but amplified to an almost incomprehensible degree. Artillery units coordinating with infantry advances, supply lines stretching across continents, intelligence networks gathering information from behind enemy lines. "This is military cooperation involving millions of individuals," observed a student whose species had never developed warfare. "How is such coordination even possible?" "Practice," Alex said simply. "Humans have been refining cooperative strategies for hundreds of thousands of years. We've gotten very good at it." But the display wasn't finished. It shifted to show something that made even Professor Caney lean back in his chair with shock. Massive construction projects that required the coordination of millions of humans across decades of time. Cities that housed millions of individuals in coordinated harmony. Transportation networks that moved resources and people across entire continents with clockwork precision. "You've applied predatory pack behavior to your entire civilization," Professor Caney said, his voice barely audible. "And then we took it to space," Alex added, changing the display one final time. The holographic projection now showed something that every student in the room recognized with a chill of understanding. Human space exploration efforts, not individual, humans seeking adventure, but coordinated expeditions involving thousands of people on the ground supporting single missions. Entire civilizations devoted to the cooperative goal of expanding into the galaxy. When humans first detected alien signals, Alex continued, we didn't respond as individuals. We spent decades coordinating our response as a species. When we developed space travel, it wasn't the project of single humans or even small groups. It was the coordinated effort of our entire civilization. The room had fallen into the kind of silence that comes when people realize they have been fundamentally wrong about something important. These alien students, representing species that had spent millions of years believing that individual excellence was the pinnacle of evolution, were confronting the reality that humans represented the ultimate expression of cooperative predation. This is why, Alex said quietly, when humans joined the galactic community, we didn't come as individual explorers or merchants looking for opportunities. We came as a unified species with coordinated goals and strategies. A student near the back of the room, one of the peaceful herbivorous species, asked the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice. Alex, if this is how humans approach everything, how do we know that your presence in the galactic community isn't just another hunting strategy? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Alex looked around the room at faces that now showed a mixture of fascination, respect, and unmistakable fear. You don't, Alex said honestly. But I can tell you this. Humans learned long ago that the most successful hunts are the ones where everyone benefits. We discovered that cooperation works better than conquest, that trading partners are more valuable than victims, and that the biggest prey requires the biggest pack. He gestured around the room at the diverse collection of alien students. This classroom, this station, this entire galactic community represents the largest cooperative hunting ground in the known universe. Resources, knowledge, technology, culture, all available through peaceful cooperation. So why would humans risk destroying it through aggression when we can achieve so much more by being the cooperative predators we've always been? The silence that followed was absolute. Every student in the room was grappling with the same realization. They weren't just classmates of a human. They were potential packmates of the most sophisticated cooperative hunters in the galaxy. The question wasn't whether humans were dangerous. The question was whether that danger could be channeled into mutual benefit. Professor Caney finally broke the silence, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose entire understanding of the universe had just been reconstructed. Class dismissed. As students began to file out of the room in unusual quiet, many cast backward glances at Alex, who remained at the front of the classroom, calmly gathering his notes. Their conversations were subdued, conducted in whispers and worried tones. They had come to class thinking they were learning about alien predators. They were leaving with the understanding that they were surrounded by them. And the most unsettling part of all was that they were beginning to realize that might not be a bad thing. After all, every successful pack needs members with different skills. And in the vast hunting ground of the galaxy, there was room for everyone who could contribute to the hunt. The question was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready to accept humans as pack leaders, or whether they would prefer to remain prey.